All right, quickly, don't even think about it too hard. When is the last time that someone tried to control you? Control your behavior, control your thoughts. It can be done in a very dark, brutal sort of way like gaslighting. It can be done through manipulation or guilt feeling or just pulling the I am this relationship with you card, or whatever the case may be. It's not that hard to think of, right? How do we feel about that? Okay, is that sitting in our chest? Good. Okay, now, just as quick, when's the last time that we have tried to control someone else's behavior? Yeah, that one's not as much fun, is it? If the answer is we haven't, then we are lying to ourselves because, as I try to say on a regular basis, for everyone that we are in therapy because of, someone is in therapy because of us, right? It's the same sort of thing. If we've ever been controlled, then we have also tried to control someone else. And as the great spiritual teacher Carolyn Mace is wont to say, all right, everyone out there who has a vested interest in controlling someone else's life or behavior, raise your hand. And anyone whose hand is not being raised, we are lying to ourselves. This is pretty universal. We can do it passively, aggressively, consciously, or unconsciously, but we do try to control other people's behaviors. Now, there's a fascinating passage that deals with this in Vayigash, in our Torah portion for this week. And this is once again more of the Joseph story, but it's no longer the Hanukkah overcoming part. This is the integration of the Hebrew people into Egypt. This is the big setup, the foreshadowing for the Exodus story, the real central theme of all of Torah and all of Judaism. Be kind to strangers because you were once strangers in Egypt. But before we can have that set up, we actually need to figure out how we became strangers in Egypt. And in the process of bringing about this narrative, there's kind of a throwaway passage, and it's Joseph talking with his brothers and trying to help them as they're going to be called towards the Pharaoh. Remember, Joseph is the second most important person in the kingdom, so obviously his brothers are going to be called in front of Pharaoh, and, Joseph wants to make sure that they say the right thing. So here's the passage. This is Genesis 46, verses 33 and 34, and we read, "So when Pharaoh summons you and asks, 'What is your occupation?' you shall answer, 'Your servants have been breeders of livestock, herders, from the start until now, both we and our fathers, so that you may stay in the region of Goshen, for all shepherds are abhorrent to the Egyptians.'" All right, lots of good debate among the Gedolim, our sages, the pre-anthropological study sages, who were trying to figure out what exactly is going on here. Most likely what was going on here was that there were several Egyptian gods in the pantheon, including Amun, who, when combined with the sun god Ra, Amun-Ra, is kind of known as the Zeus of the Egyptian pantheon, so kind of the king of the gods, as it were, and the sheep was one of their symbols. And maybe the analogy would be, what would it be like if we were to set up shop in a traditional Hindu society and say that we were slaughterers of cows? That, you would want to make sure that's communicated correctly, and you would probably be wanting to settle in a location where that wasn't going to offend the local populace, and that's most likely what's going on here. And so from that standpoint, what Joseph does is completely reasonable, right? Let's make sure that you don't make a huge social faux pas, and in the same time, we're going to make sure that by not making a social faux pas, we're going to ensure that we are put in a part of the country where we can kind of do our own thing. So all this is incredibly reasonable and makes a lot of sense. And quite frankly, this falls into the purpose of a tribe, the purpose of tribal law. And I know that this is what I've been talking about a lot, and I'm going to for a while, because I think that this is one of the most important things that we can really understand right now, is how we function with or without a tribe, what a tribe actually is, acknowledging when we're in a tribe, even if we don't think we're in a tribe. And the purpose of a tribe is safety and security. And this is exactly what's happening here. Communicate your tribe, know what your tribe is, go and be safe as a tribe. Say this and you will be able to exist as the tribe that you have been from the start. And then continuing on, this is the setup for the Exodus story. This is the central narrative of what it means to be Jewish. So why even question what happens here? And the reason to question what happens here is not necessarily to say the story should have played out differently, but because one of the great purposes of Torah is we get to actually look at humans with every bit of human frailty that we have, making the decisions that we're making. And what we get to see here is what a tribal decision looks like. And if we're not judging it, if we don't feel uncomfortable, it means that we're doing the telescoping effect, that we look back far enough in time and we no longer are really trying to relate ourselves to the human beings that existed then, but part of how we're supposed to interpret Torah is to exactly do that, to pull that into today and say, what does that mean for us today? That's the allegorical part. That's the drash part of our tradition, right? We have this idea that we can interpret every part of our tradition in 4 different ways or 4 different modalities: the surface or clear meaning, the metaphorical or symbolic meaning, the explanatory or the allegorical meaning, and then the mystical meaning. This gives us the acronym PARDES, analogous to paradise, the Garden of Eden, right? We put all of our interpretations together and we find an analogy to heaven, which is beautiful stuff. And let me do what I think we should do when we read Torah, and let's pull it into today. Let's give it some meaning. Let's give it some weight around our lives. And let's go back and look at the story, but with a slightly different perspective. And so once again, here we have Joseph, and the brothers kind of need to listen to him because their survival depends on it. He is the second only to Pharaoh in Egypt, and he says, you say this, and what are you going to do? You're going to say what Joseph says, especially considering all the past that's there. But what if you don't want to be a sheep herder? I'm not trying to be cute. I'm not trying to even be clever here. But if we don't question this story, it means we haven't pulled it into the present, because part of our entire issue with breaking away from tribes is our tribe wants us to be the sheep herder, or fill in the blank for whatever it is that your tribe wanted you to be. And you go back not very far in time, you did not have a choice. Your tribe said you need to work in the family farm, you need to work in the shop. Even look at the Joseph story from a slightly different perspective. Remember, Joseph is functioning as the hero of the story, so we're not necessarily going to question his motives. But did Joseph only have his brothers in mind? One of the commentators of Torah says that he wanted to make sure that there was no jealousy. And if the brothers would have been able to have different positions within Egyptian society, they might have then seen that Joseph was once again more powerful than they were, that he had power over them. It would be a recreation of the Joseph and the not Technicolor Dreamcoat, probably a coat with very long sleeves, different story for a different day. But as much as Joseph might have been perhaps doing what was best for the tribe, and remember, the final part of the story is we were enslaved. That might be necessary for the narrative, but not very fun for the people who were in it. And so from one perspective, Joseph is protecting the tribe. From another perspective, Joseph is preventing his tribe from individuating and from actualizing. Back to a way that we can look at how Torah is just describing how we exist. See, it's a necessity that we control behavior, right? When a child is born and there's no agency and we have to protect, there is a 100% need for us to protect at that point. Now, we move to the other side, and when someone has to function as a full adult, then that need for protection, for tribal safety, for complete control that was 100 at birth is now, well, I'm going to say 0, but we can argue about that. And if someone says, well, what's the appropriate age? It's going to be, depending on your perspective, what's the appropriate age for a child to be fully actualized, and someone jokes 35. Okay, it's funny, but it's not funny, because if someone hasn't actualized by probably early 20s, then their chance of launching in life is getting close to null and void. See, this is actually kind of a big deal, because sometimes we're controlled by the tribe, and sometimes we are the one who is controlling others for the sake of the tribe, even if the tribe is me and my immediate circle. And how easy is it to justify, I'm only doing what's best for you? If this is a conversation with someone who's 6 months old, that's one thing. If it's a conversation with someone who's 6 years old, it's still about that same thing. If it's 16, we're starting to get into some interesting debatable territory, and if it's 26, we've got some big problems. But yet the amount of parents I've worked with as a therapist who are still deeply, deeply invested in controlling their children at 45, 55, 65, it's pretty universal. Either way, what we're dealing with here is the need to become aware of not only when someone is controlling us, which we usually feel, but also not only how we try to control others, but the justifications that we make for it. Now, this is a sermon, so I get to do a little bit of sermonizing, and I want to close this week out with a little bit more global thought. And that's about how we educate our children, how we educate each other, how we step into moments of education. And again, I'm not talking about right or left. I'm talking about, in general, something that seems to be becoming more important, and that is defining education by what we get out of it. Specifically, we are going to teach in this specific way so that these are the things that someone is saying when they come out of that. And again, it doesn't matter if you're left, right, center, extreme, one way or another, we're all invested in controlling others. And this has begun to permeate each of the places that I've lived, certainly Germany, certainly the States, certainly the United Kingdom, more and more each year. And there's utility to that. There's a reason that we might want to do that. And I'm not talking about technical information. I'm not talking about a technical trait, that sort of thing, because that is a very old tradition where the purpose of that is to come out with the information that is necessary to do that technical trait. I'm talking about classical liberal arts education. And I'm not trying even to misuse liberal in any way, shape, or form here. The concept of liberal arts education has been around for a very long time. It was kind of a result of Charlemagne. But once we infuse that sort of higher education, I'd say starting in junior high when we're able to think metaphorically and symbolically, and we move into high school, and then certainly at the college university level, if how we are educating is to make sure that someone comes out saying exactly what I want them to say, left, right, center, then we've broken something. We've not only taken what Joseph did here at the potential worst case scenario, we've now solidified that, we've reified that in something that is becoming very dangerous. Because I would hope that I would get some agreement that the purpose of that kind of education is to teach people how to think. But there's a danger. The danger is that if someone is given the freedom to ask questions and to examine both sides, the answer might be a different answer than mine. And going back to the very beginning of this sermon when I said, who are we invested in controlling? Well, if we are invested in making sure that someone gets educated to believe exactly as we do, that our circle of friends does not disagree with us, that our family does not disagree with us, if that's our investment, then we are invested in control, controlling the thoughts of those around us so that they do not make us uncomfortable. It's conflating the security of my tribal system with the evil that is outside of my tribal system. And that's taking us back to a time of Egypt and pharaohs and only being able to be a sheep herder and moving into slavery. Those symbols existed at that time for a reason. We have moved past that. We can transport Torah into today because we have the ability to be actualized. We have the ability to say, I don't want to be a sheep herder. But part of that freedom is allowing others the freedom to make a decision that we don't like. And if we're deeply uncomfortable right now with that thought, then we are invested in complete control of someone else. And at the most basic ethical level, how do you feel about someone's deep investment in controlling you? And if the answer is, I don't like it, then we have to look more carefully at how we are trying to control others, even if it is how we educate them. That is a Shabbat Shalom, a Shabbat of peace, but a Shabbat of completeness. Thank you for being a part of Beit Virtuali. We'll see you next time.
כי כל אלוהי העמים